Sometimes one generation makes all the difference. When Humanistic Judaism started in the 1960s and began to grow in the 1970s, it was led by charismatic and iconoclastic rabbis and leaders like Sherwin Wine in Detroit, Dan Friedman in Chicago, Peter Schweitzer in New York. They had broken away from the Reformed Judaism of their training and even more traditional Judaisms of their upbringing. They were challenging the status quo. They were breaking boundaries. They were radicals. Now, I grew up in a humanistic congregation. I never considered Humanistic Judaism to be that radical. It just worked. It made sense. I never felt like I had to say one thing in synagogue and something else at home or in science class or in history class. They always worked together. It just made sense. Our approach to the world we live in just makes sense. Stuff happens out there, no matter what we hope or wish for, and it's up to us to make it better or sometimes to make it worse. We understand the world through reason and evidence. We try to find out the truth as best we can discover it, and if there's new evidence, maybe truth changes too. We learn that we have to take care of ourselves, and we also have to take care of others. It's a concept called enlightened self-interest. I do what's good for me, but with an understanding that I'm related to other people too. We have mutual responsibility as well as enlightened self-interest. And we believe that this life is the only one that we can know. And if that's it, then why not make the best of it in the time that we have? That's humanism, and it just makes sense to me. I think that our view of being Jewish makes a lot of sense too. Jews believe so many different things that religion is part of being Jewish, but not all of it. It makes a lot more sense to think about being Jewish as to be connected to a culture that includes holidays and life cycle events, and also literature, which includes both holy writings, which were written by people, and ordinary stories, poetry, prose, and drama written by people since the holy writings. And those modern writings can be just as extraordinary. It just makes sense to call it a culture because that's how people live it. It's food and language and music. It's not only religious belief and ritual practice. If our Jewishness is a culture, cultures are made by people. They change over time in response to new needs and new ideas, new creativity. Culture influences other cultures and is influenced by other cultures. And that's our Judaism, and it just makes sense, because that's how people live, and that's what Jewish life has been like from its beginnings. We're in election season right now, as you may have noticed. And sometimes polls come about. You know, fewer and fewer people are answering their phones for anything anymore, but certainly for polling. But I once answered the phone for a poll, and after asking my political opinions, they began to ask some demographic questions. One of the questions they asked was about religious connections. So they said, "Did the clergy at your congregation preach about political issues recently?" And I had to think, did I? "How often do you attend religious services?" "All the time." "How often do you pray?" "Never." I'm sure their data went, did not make any sense to them, but that's who we are. We attend services and we don't pray. But we get the question all the time, how can you be a Jewish congregation, a congregation that doesn't pray, that doesn't teach its children and its adults to worship a God, to believe that the Torah comes from heaven, whether it was directly from heaven or maybe through the intermediary of people writing it, that there's something divine about this document? Well, what does Kol Hadash do as a congregation, as a community, as a group of people, whatever you want to call it? We share Jewish community connection. We celebrate Jewish holidays, Jewish life cycle celebrations as expressions of Jewish culture that we can adapt to meet human needs and our values. We provide a Jewish education for our children in that Jewish cultural identity, as well as helping them learn to think for themselves. We offer that transcendence I spoke about, the inspiration and the community connection, a sense of being part of something before our time and beyond our time. And we do good in the world by acting together. We also believe that you don't have to be Jewish to do Jewish. That is, if you're at this Shabbat service tonight, whether you identify as Jewish or not, you're doing something Jewish by being here. You can eat latkes, you can spin dreidels, you can light Hanukkah candles, you can be part of a Jewish family. And we've had our doors open to intercultural and interfaith families from our beginnings in the 60s, when many rabbis wouldn't give you the time of day, let alone publicly officiate a ceremony. Our rabbis did. It's a point of pride for us. Now, if a community does all those things, if it walks like a congregation and quacks like a congregation, then maybe it's reasonable to call it a congregation. The Hebrew for synagogue is Beit Knesset, which means house of meeting. It's not a Beit El, the house of God. The Beit El, the house of God, was the temple in Jerusalem. But the Beit Knesset was the house of meeting, the place where the people gathered. It's a human house. So, okay, our arguer concedes, maybe you can have a Jewish community of Humanistic Judaism. But how can you have a rabbi who is not devout and pious, not a frum observer of Jewish law who follows everything strictly, a model of Jewish identity and religious practice? Now, I have to point out that the person saying that is missing something even about traditional Judaism. Because in Orthodox communities, there is no tradition of the rabbi has to do more than any ordinary member. Everybody's expected to keep kosher, to follow Shabbat rules, to not violate any of those commandments. So there's no idea that the rabbi is the designated Jew who has to suffer on everybody's behalf. You know, the idea of someone suffering on your behalf, maybe that belongs to another tradition. Very early in my tenure at Kol Hadash, I was chatting with someone about my plans for the high holidays, and I mentioned that before Yom Kippur services, I was planning to go out to breakfast at Walker Brothers Pancakes. And they said to me, "You're going out publicly for breakfast? What if somebody sees you?" I said to them, "Well, I'll just say to them, what are you doing here?" If there's no difference in standard for the rabbi and anybody else, then I'm not ashamed to drink water on Yom Kippur because I have to talk. And that isn't what defines the holiday for me. Some of our members choose not to eat on Yom Kippur. Some of our members do eat on Yom Kippur. Some of our members find a middle ground that works for them. I love the fact that you are free to make your own choices about that. That's who we are. Not one tradition or the other, but freedom to make the choice of what of your heritage is meaningful to you. So just like the walking like a congregation, quacking like a congregation, what does it mean to quack like a rabbi? I teach. I create and lead celebrations. I help to organize communities and occasionally put out fires in community organization. I provide pastoral counseling and support. One of my colleagues, Rabbi Greg Epstein, who's the humanist chaplain at Harvard and MIT, in his first book, Good Without God, points out that reason and science are all well and good, but they can't visit you in the hospital. There's something about having that connection with someone who can do that that's meaningful, and it's some of the most meaningful work that I do, to be able to help people through those difficult times. Most importantly, my job is to be an expert in Jewish identity and to provide that kind of emotional and philosophical support, to explore ideas, to provide inspiration, but also to make you think. In a traditional ordination, 2 questions were asked and answered of rabbis. Yoreh, can he teach? It was answered, Yoreh, he can teach. Yadin, can he judge? Can he enact religious law? Yadin, he can judge. Well, when humanistic rabbis are ordained, we still ask 2 questions, but the questions are different. The first question is the same. Yoreh, can he teach? Torah, can she teach? Torah, she can teach. That's still a part of the tradition. But the second question is different. We ask, instead of to judge, Yaskil, can he enlighten? Taskil, she can enlighten. That's our role. That's our duty. It's to provide light, to be that shamas, that candle that lights others, not to guard the light for ourselves and then tell you what to do. Now, if it walks like a rabbi and it quacks like a rabbi, maybe it's appropriate to call it a rabbi. Now, there is a title in Mizrahi Judaism and Eastern Judaism in the Middle East. They call their leaders Chacham, which means sage. And at one time I thought about printing up business cards that said sage on it instead of rabbi, but I thought that might be a little bit chutzpahdik. To my mind, Kol Hadash is just not that controversial. At its most basic, we are a community of people who share a connection to this cultural Jewish identity, either as individuals, in our own heritage, or as part of a family we've married into. We share a philosophy of life and how the world works. We share common values, even as we may have differing interpretations of those values. We don't always have to agree on everything. I love that slogan we came up with, like-minded people who don't think alike. And we choose to come together for a feeling of community, to celebrate together, to commemorate together, to create meaningful experiences like these beautiful musical experiences together, just like they do at other congregations too. It's not that radical for people who share values and share an identity and share beliefs and share a desire to create meaningful experience to do that. That's what we do. And yet, we're not just like everyone else. We like to say we do Jewish differently. There was a wonderful project undertaken by Andrea Friedlander and Susan Adelson, along with some input from me too, that revamped our website from top to bottom to explore the many aspects of Jewish and human life and highlighting what we do differently. And I invite you, if you haven't had a chance to browse through that, take a look as we go through the Jewish calendar, find each of the holidays and see how we do Sukkot differently, how we do Hanukkah differently. They're all interesting, they are insightful, and they may expand your understanding of your connection to Kol Hadash, even if you've been here from the very beginning. It explains mitzvahs and why we do them, our Jewish education, and everything else. I once asked someone at a congregational event, why do we have such interesting people that are part of Kol Hadash? And this person told me that people become part of a humanistic congregation because of the ideas. It's not the convenience, it's not the lake view, it's not even the sign on the side of the road, though we have gotten a couple of members who saw the sign on the side of the road. It's not even the carpooling to Sunday school. You wouldn't believe how many people join a congregation for the carpool to Sunday school. For us, it's about who we are and what we believe and what we share. People sometimes ask, what's the best way to explain what Kol Hadash is? You know, we could work on bumper stickers. And one year for the high holidays, I actually had a whole series of bumper sticker suggestions. So one of them was me, we, that combination of the individual and the group. Another one, what's a three-letter word for who's in charge of your life? Y-O-U. Or another slogan, miracles happen, they take a lot of work. Or maybe we focus on simple concepts. Our movement, our identity is about this life, this world, these hands, and you together. Or maybe we can come up with other slogans, like the one I mentioned before, like-minded people who don't think alike. We could use, in good we trust, with the implied shift. Or matzah without dogma. Maybe that's the point. But sometimes the best approach is the easiest. All you have to do is describe why Kol Hadash, why humanistic Judaism works for you. Every answer will be different and personal and meaningful. You know, evangelical Christians often testify. They share their personal experience of meaning and why they are who they are. Well, we can do it too. We can just call ourselves humangelicals. We're spreading our message and sharing our testimony of why this identity, this community is meaningful to us. We know that there are over 1 million American Jews out there who do not believe in the God of the Bible, who define their own Jewishness as a culture and ancestry, and they might find that humanistic Judaism works for them too, just like it works for us. As James Earl Jones once said in the movie, once we build it, if we build it, maybe they'll come, but once we sound the shofar, the doors are open, and let them come.